Good morning. Well, a few things. Happy New Year, first of all. Second thing, thank you for coming. I think this message is going to be a special one, and I laid up in bed and I thought, how many people are going to see the snow and go, oh, I don't need to go to church? And so thank you for coming. Now, before we start, I put together a 2020 hot tip list, okay? So we're going to call these Micah's hot tips for 2020, all right? They're not fashion tips or anything like that, although I've been told that I do have a good style. Here are my hot tips for 2020. Tip number 1, get a mentor or be a mentor. If you're at the age or faith maturity where you think that you could bless someone who's younger than you, do it. If you are growing and you think I could be blessed from somebody older than me, do it. The next is keep the end in mind. Keep 2021 in mind. I said this kind of nervously as I got up at our last service, but at the end of this year, what things are you going to want to say that you did more of and did less of? So you're not going to want to hit 2021 and say, oh man, I'm sure glad I watched a lot of TV this year. I wish I could have watched more TV this year, but I couldn't find the time. So think about the things you want to do more of and then do them. Read more books, audio books. If you drive is one way that I've been taking in books. Read more books or listen to more books, whatever you want to consider that. Here's a good one. Message the people you need to message. Take 30 seconds out of a day and send somebody a nice message. Takes no time at all. I've been trying to do this. Send messages to people that I care about because you don't actually say that many nice things to people in the run of a week, I've found, unless you try to do it. And then finally, ask yourself where God is and go there. Find out where God is working and start working in that moment. Okay, so those are my hot tips. I hope one of them was good for you. I'm going to maybe do those every week. We'll see what happens in January. Those are 5. Those are hot to the touch. Okay, we're talking about waiting today. Our verse, Jeff already said, Isaiah 40:31 is, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not faint. Now, this was a verse that I had on a little bookmark in my children's Bible when I was a kid, and I've always known it and had it memorized and appreciated it, and it's a good verse, and I want you to know it. And the issue is that waiting is a hard thing. I don't like waiting at all, ever. I hate waiting. So Dave called me last week after the combined service, and he said, what do you want to preach on next week? He said, how about kindness? And I said, no, I think I want to do patience or waiting because I've been struggling with this and I know that I'm bad at it, so I always get a little boost when I write a message. And if you're anything like me, maybe you hate waiting too. So let's consider it. A priest, a doctor, and an engineer were waiting one morning for a particularly slow group of golfers. The engineer asked, what's with these guys? We must have been waiting here for 15 minutes. The doctor agreed. I've never seen such slow golfers. The pastor noted, hey, here comes the groundskeeper. Let's have a word with him. The pastor called out to the groundskeeper, hey, George, what's with this group ahead of us? George said, that's a group of blind firefighters. They lost their sight saving our clubhouse from a fire last year, so we always let them play for free anytime. The group was silent for a moment. The pastor sympathized. That's very sad. I think I'll say a special prayer for them tonight. The doctor added, that's a good idea. In fact, I'm going to contact my ophthalmologist buddy and see if we can do anything for these guys. And then the engineer spoke up, well, that's great, but in the meantime, why can't these guys play at night? People aren't very good at waiting, right? People don't like to wait. And we live in a world where people like waiting less and less and less and less. We live in a world where you can get Amazon Prime and you can get your packages within 3 days. You never have to go to the store. Some people get their groceries through Amazon, or you can order your groceries now through the grocery store and you can just go pick them up. You never have to even go down the aisles. Everything is fast. The internet is fast. Your phone is fast. If you have to wait for the internet for a couple seconds, you get frustrated. Everything has to be done as quickly as possible. And in the meantime, Christians don't spend any more time waiting or trying to practice waiting or practice patience than anybody else. I get just as frustrated with the slow car in front of me or the wait times at any particular business. I don't like waiting, and because I'm a Christian, I'm not any better at waiting than anybody else, I wouldn't say. I don't practice being a good waiter or being patient. Maybe we would say the same thing. What separates a Christian person at waiting than a non-Christian person? Well, that's a good question. If we don't look different because of our faith than other people, then what's our faith have to do with anything? Maybe it's not important. Well, that's not true. Maybe we've just missed how to wait. Well, a biblical definition of waiting is actually broken up into 4 different words. There's 4 words that would constitute the idea of long-suffering, patience, waiting. I'm not going to go through a big Greek examination today, but basically a biblical definition of waiting would be patience in the state of endurance under difficult circumstances, which can mean persevering in the face of delay, provocation without acting or negative annoyance and anger, and exhibiting forbearance when under strain, especially when faced with longer-term difficulties. Being good at waiting, you could say. Our first point, which I've already really gone through, is called waiting on the world to change. We don't do anything really different than anybody else. The issue is that when we don't wait, and we don't try to wait better, life just flies right by. If you spend your time going, I wish I could just have grandkids, then you're not going to enjoy the period you're in. Or I wish I could just get to that point where I get that job. Or I wish I could get the kids that I want right now. Or I wish I could get married. Or I wish I could have a girlfriend or a boyfriend. I wish I could go to university. I wish I could get out of high school. If you're always waiting or never waiting and always wishing things away, life is not a good way to go through. It's not a good way to go through life. Let's go to point number 2, God in the waiting room. God in the waiting room. You know, it's often in the waiting room that you learn a lot about yourself and how good you are at waiting and how good you are at giving things into somebody else's hands. You know, you can't change anything. You're dependent on somebody else, and yet you just have to sit there. Now, I've called this point God in the waiting room because God is in the waiting room. People don't always think that God's with them all the time, but I think that God is with you all the time. And whatever waiting room you're in, God is in it too. And God cares a lot about waiting. All through the Bible, God uses examples of waiting to reveal his plan through his people. And he uses waiting as a very strategic, important point in getting his story across. Let's consider some examples. Abraham was told that the whole world would be blessed through him, and it took him 25 years to get there. 25 years. Abraham must have been a little bit confused in those 25 years. When am I going to have this kid? In fact, he gets so impatient that he takes matters into his own hands. He wasn't good at waiting either. But 25 years later, God shows up after he makes him wait. Moses waits for 40 years. Now, the interesting thing about Moses' waiting period is that when Moses goes into his 40 years, he's an indulgent, quick-tempered, fast-moving guy. He's actually a murderer. He's that impatient. He got impatient and murdered. He goes into the wilderness, not the model Christian by any stretch of the imagination, but by the end of his time, by the end of his waiting period, by the end of his 40 years, Moses is next to Jesus. After Jesus, Moses is referred to as the most faithful person, our best example to look up to. There's something in the waiting that helps mold Moses, that makes him better. Waiting for Jesus' return. It's been a very prominent idea in Christian theology, waiting for Jesus. And in fact, there's 400 years in between the last prophet and when Jesus even shows up. It seems that God doesn't work very fast all the time, but that he does use waiting. God tests our commitment. He tests our courage. He tests our perseverance. And he uses waiting as training. Sanctification and growth come from trial. Nobody needs to be patient and wait when things are going well, but they don't grow either. Nobody's grown through good times and smooth sailing. Calm seas never made a skillful sailor. Easy, breezy, beautiful, those things never made someone better. It's through hard times, in long suffering, in times of confusion that people grow. And God knows this. He tests our commitment. He tests our courage, perseverance, and he uses waiting as training. But as point number 1 suggested, everybody wants things to be carefree. Everybody wants things to be easy instead. Actually, I'll tell a little story. I met a guy in the last couple months, and I gotta be careful about how I tell the story. I met a guy, and he was very angry at God, super angry at God, actually, and he didn't want anything to do with God. And I said, "Why are you frustrated with God?" And he said, "Well, he just never does anything the right way, and I'm struggling, and he never shows up when I want him to." And the boy was about 16. And I remember being 16 and having all the same concerns. But the issue is what I would even like to say to him now, several years later, is that God's going to grow you and mold you in a way that you would never understand through this period. And if he came in and fixed everything all the time, you would never grow and you'd never become a better person. But it's still hard to understand that. Everybody wants their problems taken right away. Another place you learn a lot about waiting, other than the waiting room, is a farm. Who here has ever worked on a farm? Because I'm interested. Yeah, working on a farm. Does anybody know who Aldo Leopold is? Do you? Okay. You haven't read a lot of books on Aldo, eh? Not an Aldo guy. Yeah, other than the shoes. Okay, so Aldo Leopold was one of the modern founders of conservation. He worked in nature and was a very special person. Aldo Leopold put it this way: there are 2 spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. One is the danger of supposing that breakfast comes from the grocery, and the other is that heat comes from the furnace. Isn't that a good point? Because in today's world, everybody's heat comes from the dial. You just turn that right up. And their meat just comes from the food section where they get it. And they never understand the trial and the long period of time it takes to see things grow, for animals to grow, to cut the wood and cut down the trees. You got to do that at a certain point in the year. I bought a house in Portersville, so I've had to do these things. We had our chickens grow, and we had to cut down wood, and then to chop wood, and then to go get the wood and actually put it in a fire and make a fire if we want the house to be hot, right? It takes time. It takes energy and perseverance, waiting, working. Things don't grow overnight on a farm. It takes a lot of hard work, and it takes a lot of waiting. And do you know what? God gets that. Do you know why? Because God is a gardener. Okay? God is a gardener. And this is the best point today. I've toiled this through in my mind over and over. I've stayed up late at night thinking about God as a gardener every night this week. If you could see me, Micah, at 2 a.m. sitting up in bed thinking about God being a gardener, you'd be happy with me that I went this extra mile to think of this point. God is a gardener. Poor Emily. I've had to talk about God being a gardener more times this week. God is a gardener. Here's a few points to convince you before I go into my big dramatic thought. God is a gardener. Isaiah 61:11 says, "For as the soil makes the sprout come up and the garden causes seeds to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations." The fruit of the Spirit, you ever hear of those? Yeah, fruit of the Spirit, that makes sense. It was God who created the vegetation. Yes. John 15:1 says, "I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener." John 20:15, and for the people who want homework, this is an interesting thing to consider. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" He being Jesus. "Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you carried him away, tell me where you put him, and I will get him." This is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not in the Garden of Gethsemane, sorry. This is right after the resurrection. And the women, are looking for Jesus, and she mistakes him as the gardener. Now, some scholars have suggested that the reason she mistakes him as the gardener is why? Because he's gardening. Interesting. Now, some scholars, not necessarily all scholars, but some people have thought that she thought, gardener. Now, I'm not confirming nor denying, but how hilarious and what a Jesus thing to do, to raise from the dead and immediately start gardening. What a hilarious thing for for God who created the world to do, and right in line with his character. God is a gardener. I'm going to read you this, and this is all my struggles of staying up at night put into one paragraph. It has been my experience that there is nothing God loves more than seeing things flourish. He loves getting into the dirt and pulling out weeds. Yet, God is not interested in tearing up the dirt all the time. He sets up his crop so it can function on its own. And he walks in the garden and he enjoys the growth over time. He has set up everything for you to grow, and now you must grow. He will at times prune a branch or two, but growing is your responsibility. God doesn't want you to be constantly waiting for his word or blessing or his every decision. He wants you to use your free will to make smart decisions. And moreover, God didn't want you to be a sapling who needs to be constantly taken care of and to be held up with a stake. God wants you to be a strong tree, capable of withstanding storms and seasons on your own. But even though growing is your responsibility, you must work in that time. But growing just takes time, and time means waiting. Abraham Lincoln put it this way: a man watches his pear tree day after day, impatient for the ripening of the fruit. Let him attempt to force that process, and he may spoil both the fruit and the tree. But let him patiently wait, and the ripe pear at length will fall into his lap. Because some things just happen over waiting. And it doesn't matter how hard you work sometimes. Time needs to run its course. Sometimes you just have to wait. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter what you put in. You just have to grow over time sometimes to see things come to fruition. That's just how it works. Point number 3, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? A child to be saved? Somebody to become a Christian? You're waiting for a miracle? You're waiting for a spouse? You're waiting for a new start? You know, there's a lot of things I wait for too, and this is why I don't like waiting. Because I want everything right now, just like you. I want to be successful right away. I want my bills to be paid off right away. I don't always want to have to put in the time and the effort to get what's coming to me. I like just having things come to me, right? I want to see this church grow. I want to see people become Christians. And it's a slow crawl sometimes to see lives get changed. And that's frustrating. But let me say some words to you that I often need to hear myself. You are in a battle. It is a battle. Life is a battle. And there's a spiritual component. And you're mistaken if you think there is not. But God does have a plan. So don't give up while you're in the battle. God is doing his job. He always shows up at the right time. And he is in control. God is doing his job. But at the same time, in the waiting, you need to do your job. So, let me rephrase my question. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? There's a lot of people who I've met who think waiting means apathy. And if you don't know what apathy means, basically, fine, whatever, I'll wait. And I do not, this is my biggest fear about preaching this message, is that I would get up and I would say, you have to wait. And then some of you would say, okay. And then you'd go home and then you'd wait. Wait. All right, God, I'll wait another week. I'll wait another week. Whenever you want to show up, I'll keep waiting. But that's not how it works. Barack Obama said it this way: change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. One more thing I wrote this week when I was thinking about you. I feel best when I finish a day and feel accomplished. On the contrary, I feel worst when I finish a day and feel that I wasted my time. This is surely doubly true for a week, a month, and a year, and surely and most ultimately true for a lifetime. Let me read it one more time. I feel best when I finish a day feeling accomplished. On the contrary, I feel worst when I finish a day and feel that I wasted my time. This is doubly true for a week, month, and year, and surely and most ultimately true for a lifetime. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? But what do you need to do in the meantime to make it happen? You are the change. If you're waiting for somebody to become a Christian, it's not just God's job. Yes, God's the one who makes Christians, but do you know how he does it? He does it through people. If you're waiting for growth, if you're waiting for change, what is your job? And it's not apathy. It's not to do nothing. What are you waiting for? I'm going to read our verse for today one more time, and then we have a video for you. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Thank you.